Hello and welcome to episode number 32 of JRocks Pop Culture Revolution. Wow, this is going to be a really fun one, guys. I know they all are, but man, this is going to be something really special because tonight what we're going to be talking about is the fact that 2026 marks the 60th anniversary of the original Star Trek TV series. Now, how many of you were a big fan of it? I mean, this is, just in kind of preparations for tonight's episode, I got this to check out. And I saw this in the store initially, got my copy at Barnes and Noble, and initially I thought, wow, I didn't realize that Star Trek, in regards to the original TV series, turned 60 years old. So I had to get the book, and it kind of prompted me to do tonight's episode. So let's get into it, folks. Okay, as I said, 2026 marks the 60th anniversary of the original Star Trek series, which premiered on September 8th, 1966 on the NBC network. Get this, prime time at 8:30 p.m. at night. And since the show premiered on Thursday night, 60 years later, many people still associate Star Trek with Thursday nights because that's the night everybody used to sit down in front of a TV and watch Star Trek. Pretty neat, huh? And again, you got to remember at the time in 1966, and I will say, this is a show that was on the air before I was ever alive. As I noted with you guys, I came into the world July 4th, 1971 on many of our episodes. And that's important to note here because while I'm very much a Star Trek fan, Star Trek predates me. And so, like quite a number of people, I caught the series in reruns after it had long been off of TV. And we're going to talk tonight, when the show was originally on TV, it wasn't as necessarily as popular as Star Trek is even today. In fact, the show's popularity grew through reruns and other things, and we're going to get into some of that tonight. So let's talk about it now. Of course, as far as Star Trek, the TV series, everybody, it's one of those shows where everybody kind of had their favorite, character. I mean, and the characters were all so different. Let's be honest about it. I gotta say, especially a young kid watching this, teenager, even through my adulthood, probably my two favorite characters had to be Captain Kirk. I mean, Captain Kirk was the guy I always I thought he was so cool. I mean, Captain Kirk was what maybe he was equivalent of what the Fonz was to Happy Days. He was like a space cowboy. He didn't really care what other people thought. He was the guy in charge. He was he had a little bit of a temper. He did things without thinking, but he was to me the equivalent of what Fonzie was to Happy Days, to Star Trek. He was the cool guy. He was the guy that got the girls. He was the guy in charge. He was the guy that got in all kinds of trouble because sometimes he did things without, thinking. And then total reverse of that was, of course, Spock. Now Spock, unlike Kirk, and they were total opposites, but that's why they complemented each other, these characters, so well. Because while Kirk was kind of more of an adventure type of guy, he was reckless. He did things without thinking. He flew off the handle. He's a little more emotional than Spock. Well, quite a bit more emotional than Spock. Spock did things just simply because he thought too much. Spock was a character that really did think. I mean, he thought everything out. Everything was, well, it's logical. This is a logical thing to do. Spock was kind of like alien form of the, half human, half alien. And his mind was very computer-like. He thought everything out, and he weighed the pros and cons, and he always with the choice that was always what was the most logical, the most logical thing to do. And then you had Dr. McCoy, whose nickname was Bones, and he was a lot more like Jim Kirk, while Dr. McCoy is a little, he's a little more cerebral because he was a doctor. And then he looked after everybody on the ship, if anybody got sick or anything like that. But Captain or Dr. McCoy, he was a little more reckless, like Kirk. That's why I think they got along so well. But he did think that a little more than Kirk because he was a doctor, and so he'd go again with he'd read his books and he'd and he'd make his decisions based on what he'd read in a book or something. And he really thinks things, but he wasn't as emotional as he wasn't as cerebral as, let's say, Spock, who just thought everything to death. And that's why you can see, we're going to talk about it later, but you had these three kind of main characters to Star Trek. You had Captain Kirk, you had Spock, and you had Dr. McCoy. And McCoy probably, like I said, and Kirk were the most alike. And I think they were the two kind of always wanting to be in control. Kirk was definitely had the control and the power because he was a captain. But you could almost say that Spock and McCoy were kind of maybe battling it out to see who was the second in command. And then because Kirk was so reckless, and kind of not thinking things out as to the point that Spock did. Though he often depended on the advice of Spock, or he really trusted Spock to kind of know what the right thing to do was. So oftentimes when Kirk would get in a bind, he turned to Spock because he knew that he knew too that he could trust Spock, but Spock wouldn't, like other human beings, that he was working with in the Federation on the Enterprise. He knew that Spock was kind of he was from another planet. He was kind of half alien, half human type of a being. And so when Spock said something, he basically spoke the truth. He didn't really think too hard about, you'd ask him his opinion, he'd just give it. And so that is kind of, they were the three main characters. And we're going to get into why that was so important. Now, the original Star Trek TV series played its final episode on June 3rd, 1969. And we tell you this at the start of the episode because, just so you know, again, the original Star Trek series, for anybody doesn't realize, it only lasted 3 seasons. And we're going to get into why that was. So Star Trek, the original series, in its original broadcast, was only on TV from 1966 to 1969. And here's some more fun facts about it. The original Star Trek TV series, like I said, aired on NBC from 1966 to 1969. And it became one of the most influential science fiction shows ever made for TV. Star Trek was created by this guy, Gene Roddenberry. Star Trek followed the crew of the Starship Enterprise. And the Starship Enterprise, of course, is that big, beautiful spaceship that they went on all their missions on. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Enterprise, but and so the Enterprise was supposed to go on a 5-year mission, even though the actual TV show was only for 3 seasons. But when you're going out in space, of course, talking about science fiction and that, when you're in outer space, talking about time, that's kind of a different thing. So, when they say 5 years, that's totally different than maybe Earth time. So just kind of keep that in mind, folks. Now, in the 1960s, Star Trek was only a moderate rating success, but the show was canceled, like I said, after only 3 seasons. And And so what happened was it became more popular, but Star Trek became a more popular thing. Of course, you got to keep in mind Star Trek when you think about it. Excuse me, I'm talking about Star Trek, and that's another thing. Um, Star Trek we got to remember predates Star Wars. Um, but once Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie hits in 1977 again. You know, uh, years later after the original Star Trek series is off the air. By the time Star Wars comes out, Star Trek is like a thing of the past. But also, what was going on in the late 1970s as Star Wars is out in the movie theaters, and we're going to do a future episode of this because we cannot get this all in one episode. But tonight we're talking primarily about the original Star Trek TV series because the original TV series is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. Like I said, that's pretty special. But once Star Trek, you know, uh, uh, I think once Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, seen, oh, they got this other thing, Star Wars, and it was almost like the two were competing with each other. Because even though the Star Trek TV series at that point in 1977 had been off the air for many years, people were still a fan of Star Trek, and people were still catching it in reruns. And what they were discovering is that more and more people were discovering the show in reruns. And through reruns, Star Trek was becoming more and more of a popular thing to the point where um, Star Wars and Star Trek were now competitors. They were two things competing with one another. And I don't quite understand it because I'm a fan of both Star Trek and Star Wars. But there's a thing for many, many years where you had the Trekkies versus a Star Wars fan. And many people thought you could not be a fan of both. Again, that's not me because I happen to be a fan of both. But let's be honest, Star Trek came first. So if there'd never been a Star Trek, there might not have ever been a Star Wars. Who knows? So you got to take that into consideration. Now, Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, he pitched the show to the executives at NBC Network as Wagon Train to the Stars. Can you imagine somebody goes in a TV executive's office? Okay, just picture this. This is kind of like a cowboys in space. This is wagon trains, to the stars. What a great way to pitch a show. Roddenberry wanted a science fiction adventure that could also handle cultural and political issues of the day. Now, back in the 1960s, I mean, let's just bring this to modern day, 2026. It's not such an uncommon thing for there to be TV shows out there that deal with current issues and getting a little political. It's kind of become the fad, but all kind of a normal thing of the day. But in the 1960s, the TV executives just wanted to have shows that entertain us. They really so when Gene Roddenberry is talking about, I want a space age show that deals with current issues and politics. They were a little worried about that. Well, no, we just kind of want to entertain people. And so that was how Gene Roddenberry originally saw Star Trek. That was his vision of what he wanted the show to become. And that's why NBC almost passed on Star Trek because they felt science fiction wouldn't be accepted on mainstream TV. Now, if you think about it, even back in the 1960s, way before my time, but as you know, I'm a big fan of pop culture, a historian on it, I guess you could almost say. And let's be honest, in the 1960s, before Star Trek was on the TV screens, I can't think of anything really science fiction related. They were making science fiction movies, but there's really nothing on mainstream TV in the 1960s until Star Trek came on the air, that you could even call science fiction. So again, the TV executives are kind of nervous. They're like, Well, I don't know what science fiction primetime TV. I don't know if people are going to get into that. Um, and they were a little nervous about testing the waters, but thank God they did because again, once Star Trek came on the air, um, being kind of the first popular thing on TV to kind of go mainstream like that, it opened the door for other possible things, that were science fiction related. So um, it's just amazing too, because for the 3 seasons that Star Trek was on, it was a popular show, but it became more popular once it went off the air, and more people were discovering it through reruns, as we said. And of course, by the time you get to the 1980s, in the 1990s, you've had several Star Trek TV series. I mean, the first of them probably that became almost as successful, almost as popular as the original Star Trek series was The Next Generation with Patrick Stewart. And I think we're going to have to do a future episode on that one because um, next to the original TV series, that's probably the most popular of all the Star Trek series. And there were many more to follow. And we had many more, we had several Star Trek movies. I've lost count, but probably the original cast from the original TV series, they would go on to do the motion picture and several other movies that would actually be out in the movie theater. And once they started having these Star Trek movies and these other all of Star Trek TV series, you started getting the Star Trek conventions and the merchandise. And that just put Star Trek so over the top that Star Trek is a major pop culture thing to this date. And you just can't get around it. It's one of those things that 60 years later, it's even more popular than it was when it was on the air. I cannot state that enough. But that's the main thing I want people to take away from tonight's episode because again, 60 years later, it's the 60th anniversary of the original Star Trek TV series. And you know what? Star Trek's more popular 60 years later than it was when it first went on the air in 1966. So just think about that. Think of all the merchandise, all the movies, all the TV series. There was even at one point, again, just because we cannot get it all in tonight's episode. Tonight, we're just focusing on the fact that the original TV series of Star Trek turned 60 this year, 60th anniversary. That is something that really deserves to be celebrated and honored. And all the stuff that came later, we're going to have future episodes on because, again, Star Trek is one of those pop culture things. There was so much to talk about. At one point, if you can believe it, even after the original TV series ended, at one point they had the original cast do an animated TV version of Star Trek, if you can believe that. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. Now, a few more things that you guys need to know. There were actually two separate pilots made for Star Trek. The original pilot did not feature William Shatner as Captain Kirk. They had another actor playing Captain Pike, and they just didn't feel that the original actor captured what they were looking for in a captain. But once they cast William Shatner in the part, they the executives at NBC they just loved the way he did Captain Kirk. They thought he did it but he was very emotional when he read his lines, and he really felt the part. He really portrayed Captain Kirk the way he really when they seen him act his parts out in the pilot, they really believed he brought that character to life, and that's why to this day, William Shatner is one of two remaining cast members that are sadly most of the original cast has passed on. You've got William Shatner, who's in his mid 80s, and George Takei. who's still alive. And the interesting thing is William Shatner, as we sit here, he's done a lot of other things outside of Star Trek because of the success of the Captain Kirk character and his popularity because of being in the original Star Trek series. He is currently, if you can believe it, in his mid 80s, currently recording a heavy metal album. And he's going to have people like Rob Halford guest star on the album. And we're going to do an episode on that when it comes out. I cannot wait to hear it. He done another similar album probably about 10 years ago. Pretty good. And so I've always loved William Shatner, not just for his acting and his portrayal of Captain Kirk, but I love the fact that he's so willing to get out there and do other things, But he's one of those guys, he's and he's written books and stuff, and it's just I love the fact that he's really embraced Captain Kirk. Some guys might have that fear of being typecast, but he's run with it. He's embraced it. He's accepted that till the day he dies, and even years after he's dead, he will always be Captain Kirk, and that's the way we love it. So I will say that. Now, initially, NBC executives disliked the character Spock, if you can believe that. Again, Spock is one of my all-time favorite characters next to Kirk. You got the Vulcan ears, you got the personality. He's so logical. He overthinks everything. But okay, you got to hear this, and this is one of those things that goes to show you sometimes so-called experts they really know nothing. But this is what I couldn't believe. I said initially the NBC executives disliked the character Spock because they thought he looked too devilish with the Vulcan ears. Roddenberry, though, Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, he fought to keep the Spock character because he really believed in the character. And thank God Gene Roddenberry was willing to fight to keep Spock in Star Trek because, you know what? Next to Kirk, Spock was a breakout character. And just think if the so-called experts would have got their way and just ripped Spock out of Star Trek, it would have been a totally different thing than what Spock was a very important character. I can't even imagine Star Trek without the logical Mr. Spock. I mean, can you? That's just so crazy. Now, okay. Here's another fun fact about Star Trek, in case you weren't aware. Actress Nichelle Nicholson, who played O'Hara, originally planned to leave Star Trek after season 1 because she had been offered a chance to appear on Broadway. However, she decided to stick with Star Trek after having a conversation with, of all people, get this, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who King first admitted to her, but not only was he a Star Trek fan, but he explained to her that the character of O'Hara was historically important because Black women almost very rarely got a chance to star on such a major television series. And he said, most time, if you have a Black woman on a major TV show, it's rarely do they get a chance to show that they're an intelligent person, a professional in the role of authority. So again, she was one of the first Black people to be on TV, and we have to mention that because we're getting ready to mention another big thing that involved Nichelle Nichols on Star Trek. But can you imagine? I mean, and she was a very important character on the original Star O'Hara. First of all, again, I think Martin Luther King was right because forget about the fact she was Black, but having a woman in a position of authority in the 1960s, it's a pretty big thing. And then on top of you add that she was Black, and again, I think this was Gene Roddenberry's way of trying to, talk about current issues, things that were going on in the world, get a little radical, a little political, bring up modern issues that were going on in the world. Because again, the network wasn't really too crazy about doing stuff like that. Anytime you bring an idea like that, they get really, really nervous. Oh, I don't know. Let's just stick with the story. Let's not try to go too far off. But so again, it's amazing to find out that one of the leading ladies on Star Trek originally was going to leave after season one, but thanks to Dr. Martin Luther King, he talked her out of leaving. He said, "You know what? You got a pretty important role on the show. I don't know if you realize that, but I really hope you stick with it." And she did, thank God. Because again, I think, even if she would have left after season one, it would have still been a very historical landmark part on TV. But I'm glad that she stayed for all three seasons. It would have been a different show had she left after season one. And she was a very important part. So we cannot deny that. Now, do you remember the famous Star Trek kiss between Kirk and O'Hara? It is often described as the first interracial kiss to take place on American TV. And again, it seems kind of funny to be bringing this up. Like, it's not such a big deal. A black person and a white person kissing on TV. It wasn't the 1960s, though, believe it or not. And so, for that reason alone, it's very noteworthy. And again, the executives at the TV in network, NBC to be exact, they were very nervous. Oh, I don't know if we should do this. And then they even had some stations that were threatening not to show the episode if they went along with the kiss. But you know what? They aired the kiss between Kirk and O'Hara, and nothing really happened. Nothing, there wasn't really any serious backlash. People kind of questioned it, but other than that, it's just another footnote in history. But it's a noteworthy one because even though the network at NBC were kind of nervous about, oh, I don't know, we should do this. Well, thanks to Gene Roddenberry and the writers and the producers of Star Trek, they went ahead and did it. And it was just kind of one small part of the story, but it's very important, I think, that they went ahead and allowed that to take place. Now, talking about the Starship Enterprise, as I was, especially if you're a teenage boy or just a young kid watching Star Trek, how could you not love the Starship Enterprise? I mean, that was one of the reasons I watched the show. And the funny thing to kind of find out, the Enterprise model, it was huge apparently, and it took months to build. Now, more of the show's scenes, believe it or not, were actually filmed in California. So many of the scenes that look like planets, you thought they were on other planets. They filmed those scenes actually in California, if you can believe it or not. Now, another reason that Star Trek was only on the air for 3 seasons is because when you consider not only being a science fiction show, but they were trying to bring the mainstream primetime TV back in the 1960s, but you also had the fact that it was a very expensive show to produce. The cost was really heavy because they had to go on several location shoots. The special effects they had to do to shoot the show. It got to the point where it really cost. You were putting more money out than maybe what the show was making, and so at that point, even they had also the 1960s, kind of the same thing with the original Batman TV show. That only lasted for 3 seasons because while that was a very popular show, they were putting more money out to produce the show, and so it got to a point where we can't afford to, shoot any more episodes, and so Star Trek was kind of in that same kind of category. Now, here's another fun fact. The writers of Star Trek often disguised commentary that focused on nuclear fear, Cold War tensions, war, racism. Again, in regards to racism, talking about, they were bold by having having a kiss between O'Hara and Kerr. First of all, a black person and a white person kissing, that just wasn't seen on TV back in the 1960s. It was like this little TV show was getting a little bold, and people didn't know what to think after it. But and even 60 years later, as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of original Star Trek TV series, it's one of the things that people still talk about when they bring up Star Trek. And in regards to racism, like I said, the famous kiss between Kirk and O'Hara, NBC executives, they were very nervous. William Shatner, now again, he was a big part of, he was a Star Trek captain. He was an Enterprise captain, and kind of, like Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, he was kind of Kirk's right hand man. They were friends on screen and off screen, but it said that William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy had a complicated relationship because they worked together, they had a mutual respect for one another. They had periods where there was great tension between them, and they had a little bit of a occasional professional rivalry. Like, I guess maybe like, who's more popular, Kirk or Spock? So when you get people working on a successful TV show like this, you're bound to see stuff like that, happen. Now, okay, folks, let's talk a little bit about Dr. McCoy. The actor, of course, who played Dr. McCoy was DeForest Kelley, and when he was cast as Dr. McCoy, it created what became known as the trio dynamic. Now you think about it, and watching any episode of Star Trek, the original TV series, the three main characters were always seen Captain Kirk, Dr. McCoy, and Spock. They were kind of always the three guys in charge. They were the three guys making all the decisions and chatting and hanging around and palling around and basically making all the decisions. They were the three main characters in every episode. And so it created this dynamic. I never really thought about it till reading this, but I said, okay, so Kirk did everything kind of by instinct. I guess you could almost say Captain Kirk was kind of like a Han Solo type of character. Han Solo in Star Wars, very kind of reckless. He does things without really thinking. It's all kind of, everything's based, on his instinct. He kind of, he's not so much like Spock because with instinct, you just naturally do things. You do things that come naturally. You don't really think too much about it. And there's some degree of recklessness to that. Spock, on the other hand, his dynamic was logic. He thought a little too much about everything. And McCoy, he got a little more emotional, where Kirk was more instinctual. Dr. McCoy was very emotional because, again, he's a medical doctor. He's in charge of the well-being and taking care of all the crew members on the Starship Enterprise. So he's doing things like kind of from a scientific point of view. And then where James T. Kirk is a little more reckless and does things by instinct, Dr. McCoy, he thinks a lot, from a scientific perspective, maybe not to the degree that Spock does. And Dr. McCoy, like James T. Kirk, he's a little more reckless in the way he does things. He kind of reacts to everything so emotional, where Kirk is not as emotional. He just kind of reckless and does things without thinking. But everything with Kirk is instinct. If you watch anything having to do with Star Trek with these three characters, McCoy, Kirk, and Spock, there's that trio dynamic. Just think about it. It's present in every episode, every movie that they ever appeared in. And here's a fun fact you may not even realize. Star Trek, believe it or not, was a Desilu production. Desilu, of course, was a TV studio owned by legendary TV comedian Lucille Ball and her husband Desi Arnaz. Of course, they were the stars of I Love Lucy back in the 1950s. By this time, they had their own TV studio. Desilu was producing TV shows, not just like Star Trek, but Mission Impossible, The Andy Griffith Show, and so they actually Lucy kind of saved Star Trek because during the second season they were considering after a second season of canceling Star Trek, but Lucy came on board and she took over the show. She told, "Hey, you can let's have Star Trek come and film at Desilu Studios," and that's what allowed Star Trek to stay on the air for one more season because Lucille Ball was a Star Trek fan and she came and she kind of saved the show for one more season. So thank you to Desilu, thank you to Lucy and Desi Arnaz. May they all rest in peace. But man, how many of you guys knew that Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz and Desilu Studios was even connected to Star Trek? That's one of the things I enjoy about doing this show is learning stuff like this, man. It's so, that 6 degrees of separation. It's just so much fun to learn about these things. Who would have ever thought that Lucille Ball had a connection to Star Trek? But she does. Now, like I said, Star Trek was expensive to film and nearly bankrupt Desilu Studios, believe it or not, because, like I said, the visual effects, the miniatures, the makeup, the location shoots. At one point, both Star Trek and Mission Impossible, as I said, they were shows that were being produced at the Desilu Studios. So there's that to keep in mind. Now, folks, this has been a lot of fun, and I sure that down the line we're gonna continue talking about Star Trek because there's just so much to talk about. We're going to talk about some of the movies, the other TV series. So we will get into this, but it's just too much to even try to accomplish in a 30-minute episode. Now, I thought this would be fun to do before, to close with this, because typically when you tune into an episode of Star Wars, you would hear this at the beginning of every Star Trek episode. So I wrote this down. See how good I can get this. Okay, space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore new worlds, to see new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. And these were the words spoken by William Shatner, also known as Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise. Well, as you guys can tell, I am a major Star Trek fan. I had so much fun doing this, and you know what? Usually at the end of each episode, I tell you guys what's coming up next time, and we got a few couple things really that you're gonna love. But I'll just leave you with this. I'm going to interview this guy actually tomorrow night, 24 hours from now, for episode number 33. It's going to play a guy that plays in a tribute band, believe it or not. And all I will tell you is, okay, there is a pop culture tie with this guy in his tribute band, and it's a fun tie. You're not going to even believe it until you see this. And so tune in, for episode 33 next week, which is supposed to be recorded tomorrow. And if all goes well, we will be bringing you that episode next week. And again, I like to do stuff like this from time to time and have a guest come on the show because that's always fun. But when I found out about this tribute band, I thought, man, this is like no tribute band I've ever seen. And I will just tell you this, it has a tie-in to one of your all-time favorite TV shows, also from the 1960s. So just kind of think about that, and I'll give you a little clue. Kind of hang your hat on that, if you will. Gilligan. Okay, so this has been a real fun episode, and we will see you again real soon. I am Jason JRock Houston, and this has been episode number 32. So tune in, and we will be back with episode number 33 next week. Bye for now. And let's all celebrate the 60th anniversary of Star Trek. Take care, guys.